Good morning. Happy Father's Day. It is good to be with you all this morning. If you've been with us the last several weeks, you know that we have been embarking on a journey during our transition to ask questions around who we are as a community, what our collective calling has always been, and what it might look like in this next season for our church. So, in our first week in this series, we talked about being a distinctly Christian community. We talked about that this wasn't a list of belief statements on our website that tells you who's in and who's out, but instead, this is this pursuit, this persistent pursuit of what it means to follow Jesus and try to model our lives after his. Then we turned to this mantra we really love around here. We talked about what it looks like to be a community committed to unity over uniformity. Now, when we say that, what we don't mean is that we tolerate those in the room who are different than us. Instead, what we mean when we say unity over uniformity is that we actually belong to those in this room who are different than us. We are not practicing tolerance, we are practicing mutual love for one another. Last week, we talked about the practice of presence. We talked about, when we talk about being a healing presence in the world, there's this truth below that truth that requires that we too experience some healing. I shared how this space and this church was a space for healing for me when I didn't know not only if I was going to continue in ministry, but if I was going to continue as a Christian at all. And this week, we're going to start building on that idea. We're going to talk about, once we do start to experience this own healing within ourselves, what does it look like to be a healing presence in our world? We're going to talk about justice. And this is a heavy week to talk about justice because it feels like there's not a lot of it in our world right now. On top of current events and the pain that I think every person in this room is probably feeling right now, it's also the week that we celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the day that all of those enslaved Black Americans were actually finally free. See, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the news came to some in Texas, and they finally got to taste their first step into freedom. It was justice delayed, and justice delayed is still injustice. And so this is a week in which we acknowledge the hard and long work of what it looks like to seek peacemaking and justice in our world. And we're going to do this by turning to the prophets. Now, if I had to guess, for most of us in the room, the prophets are probably not the section of our text we are the most familiar with. Now, I know at Advent, we love to quote Isaiah, "For unto us a child is born." And we read this through candlelight and carols, acknowledging Jesus as that coming Messiah that we had waited for so long. But often, as we quote that, we don't think about the fact that these words were actually spoken to a people in history living in a war-torn land, waiting for their own deliverance. They were not thinking about a Messiah who would come hundreds of years removed from their own situation. We often will quote things like, "No weapon formed against me shall prosper," as sort of a battle cry, or this truth we tell ourselves about the protection that God offers us. But we don't often acknowledge that those words were spoken to a people who were picking up after deep devastation. It was a word of hope, but in a time that felt incredibly hopeless. Maybe, sitting in this room, is a tattoo that has something like the words of Amos, "Let justice roll like a river." This battle cry that we have to call people to action. But if I had to guess, if a tattoo like that does sit amongst us, I bet it doesn't include the scathing critique that came right before those words. The scathing critique for a people who wanted to pacify themselves through their own worship but did not want to care for the poor. See, we like the prophets so long as they come to us on our own terms. We like the prophets if they sort of live in the margins of my faith, where I can pull out a poetic quote when it is convenient, or when it makes me feel good, or when it makes my tattoo real pretty. We like those prophets. But the times that the prophets are really hard is when they come not just to comfort the afflicted, but to afflict the comfortable. I don't like those prophets so much. And I offer this critique not as someone who has not had her own faux pas with the prophets. Picture it with me. It's 2011. I am a spirited sophomore in Bible college. I have not taken a single class on the prophets, but I am offered the opportunity to preach to a room of middle school kids. So naturally, I think, well, why don't I preach my life verse, Jeremiah 29:11? "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And while I had not done my work in the prophets quite yet, I did at this point learn the cardinal rule of Bible college, which is this: any text without a context is just a pretext. This is a fancy way of saying, please, please, please stop pulling random verses out of the Bible to make them say whatever you want them to. And so into the context I dove. Imagine my horror when I realized that this promise that I thought God had delivered directly to me about my prosperous future and my hope of such. Imagine my horror when I realized that these words were actually spoken to a people in exile in Babylon. And worse than that, it's not just that they were spoken to them in this dark season of their history. It's that the real message behind it was, look, you're going to be in exile for a while. You should get comfortable. Set up homes, have children, plant gardens. Your deliverance is not coming anytime soon. Okay, again, picture room of middle school children going through their own exile, maybe not looking for a message of welcome to Babylon, maybe hoping for a little more hope and future. We don't get the prophets. But that's exactly where we're going to go today. Because as I look around the world right now, I wonder if the prophets actually shouldn't live on the margins of our reality or our spirituality. I wonder if where we should invite the prophets is right into the middle. So they can speak the truth not only in their own context and their own time, but also to ours. Turn with me, if you would. We're going to be in the book of Micah. If you have your Bible, we'll turn there. If you need a Bible, there will be one underneath the seat in front of you or around you, and the page number on the screen behind me will correspond to those Bibles. Here's what our text says, starting in verse 6. "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." Now, Micah was a prophet in the 8th century. He prophesied at the same time as Isaiah. But while Isaiah was prophesying to the elite, to the royal courts, to kings, Micah was prophesying to common people and even to the poor. And so they're both prophesying in the 8th century as the threat of Assyria is right in their midst. The Assyrians have been taking over land aggressively. They have been conquering nation after nation after nation. And if you know the Assyrians, they have struck terror into the human imagination, not only in their own time, but also in ours. The Assyrians were known to do things like impale their victims on poles to live or to die a slow and painful death. They were known to burn children. They were known to make kings of the lands which they conquered, grind up the bones of their ancestors so that there would be no biological evidence to their claim to the throne. In Micah tells us about the Assyrians skinning their victims alive. And the Assyrians have already taken over the northern kingdom of Israel, and now they have turned their attention to the south in Judah, where Isaiah and Micah are prophesying. Now, Hezekiah, the king of Judah, has already started to pay tribute to the Assyrians. This was a common tactic, particularly for smaller, less powerful nations, to just pay tribute or maybe even just to turn themselves over to the Assyrians so that they would not be victimized by them. And so we're told that this is Hezekiah's initial plan. And he does do this. And then one day, Isaiah comes to him and he says, no, you need to resist the Assyrians. And God promises that he will protect Jerusalem. And so Hezekiah does this. And as we read in Isaiah 36 and into 37, Hezekiah has fortified the people spiritually, physically. He has planned for this. And then suddenly that day comes. And the Assyrians show up at the walls of Jerusalem, taunting those inside, saying, did you see all the other nations? You're next. Just give up now. Just pay tribute to us. Do you want to become like them? See, the Assyrians were sort of the originators, I would say, of psychological warfare, and they were very good at it. And yet, Isaiah says, stand firm, and Hezekiah does. And when we reach the end of Isaiah 37, we are told that the angel of the Lord does, in fact, deliver Jerusalem. We are told that almost 200,000 Assyrians were taken out, I'll say, by the angel of the Lord. And actually, if we look into history, if we look at the Jewish historian Josephus, he actually tells us about a plague, potentially of mice, in which this large number of Assyrians is removed as a threat. And Sennacherib, the leader of the Assyrians, then flees to Nineveh, where his own sons take him out. So this was the writing of hope that Isaiah offers Hezekiah. He speaks to those in power. But this wasn't good news for everybody. See, Micah, in the midst of this, turns to his own people. He says, remember how God delivered you? Remember how God protected Jerusalem? The real threat isn't just those outside of our walls, it's also those within. See, what was happening in that time in Judah is that those who had were participating in some of their own fear-driven advantage. They were starting to seize the land of the poor. They were starting to see this global crisis and see it as an opportunity. They started to take advantage of the poor, those like Micah, who himself was amongst the poor and probably a refugee in the midst of all of this chaos with Assyria. They started to take advantage of those, the most vulnerable inside of their society. Now, I know for us in 2025, it might be really hard for us to imagine a world in which those who have would take advantage of those who do not. But try and picture it with me. Imagine a world in which something like, a global crisis per se, was an opportunity for some investors to profit. Or imagine in our world, if, say, something like war was a business strategy. Or imagine if someone like Micah, someone whose own town had been taken over by Sennacherib's invasion, imagine this person like Micah who is seeking refuge. What if Micah too is being taken advantage of in the very place where he should experience safety? See, that little section of Micah we love to quote about pursuing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly with God, there's actually a very scathing critique within it that's a little hard to see in our language. See, that word mercy is the Hebrew word chesed. And this word is used close to 250 times in our First Testament. And we don't have an exact English equivalent of what this means. So we have about 7 different ways that we will translate this word. And actually, if we took all 7 of them together, we'd maybe get kind of close to what it means. Sometimes we translate chesed as mercy. Sometimes we translate it as kindness. Sometimes we translate it as a covenantal faithfulness, because chesed is often used to describe the way that God is faithful and loyal to his people. So picture this. As these people of Judah have just experienced God's chesed, as they have just experienced the mercy, the care, the kindness of God in the face of their own enemies, Micah has turned around and said, you have received chesed, but you have not given it. You have not cared for those inside your own walls. You have not shown them the kind of mercy that you have been called to model. You have not given the world a picture of what our God is really like. Talking about justice is a little uncomfortable. And I think the thing that makes talking about justice so uncomfortable is because the part of talking about justice that's really easy for me is the part where I get to be enraged by all that is wrong. When I get to have this moment where flipping tables and losing my mind over all the things that somebody else did wrong, all the ways that somebody else broke this world, those are the parts of justice I really like to talk about. In fact, we all like to talk about it. Sociologists have actually come up with a phrase, the outrage industrial complex, to capture the fact that not only are we now profiting off of misfortune, we're also now profiting off of people's indignation towards profiting off of misfortune, which seems a little unjust. This is the part of justice that's easy for me to get behind. And I think if you look around the world, I think the truth is that's the part of injustice that's easy for a lot of us to get behind. But the part of injustice, the part that I think the prophets actually model for us, that we are called to get behind, is the slow, consistent, patient, kind, faithful work of justice. I don't like to bring a dark message on Father's Day, but the truth is, there is always going to be injustice in the world for as long as we are here. And we have a couple of options. We can burn ourselves up in rage. We can create more chaos. We can live in outrage and feel justified within our own selves. Or we can learn to model the kind of mercy that God models to us. A faithfulness to all. A faithfulness that calls not only those victimized by injustice, but also those who are perpetrators of it, back into the kind of covenantal faithfulness with God. Those who remind us to be kind. The kind of justice that is kind to everyone around us, whether they deserve it or not. Because more often than not in our biblical text, when this word chesed is used, and it's used of the kind of love and care and compassion that God has, it's not used when people deserve it. It's used in the very moments where we really, really, really don't deserve it. That's hard work. And when I think about this community, when I think about our history as a people at DCC, I'm encouraged by the ways in which we have pursued justice. Because it's been long and consistent in what feels like the most hopeful moments in our current history, and also in the darkest, most challenging moments of our current history. If we let justice be run by rage, we will end up in despair. But if we let this holy unrest with all that is wrong invite us into mercy, we will have hope for a future that is ran by a God who has chesed like we could never imagine. That is the call of this church. That is the work that we have done and will continue to do. Practically, that's looked like our work with Project Renew. Now, if you haven't been here for a good chunk of the history of DCC, Project Renew was our peacemaking and justice initiative. As a church, we have always participated with those in our city. We have tried to have eyes open for those who are doing healing work around our city, our nation, and our world, and we have tried to partner with them. And throughout our history, we eventually turned this into actually a formal arm within our church. See, 1/5 of everything that comes inside of our doors goes out to justice and peacemaking work in our world. Because this isn't something we just talk about or get upset about. It's something that we go, this is broken in the world, how can we help fix it? How can we bring hope? How can we participate in mercy? How can we be people of action? And people who hold on to the slow, steady work of justice. Who don't burn ourselves out, but who do this work as communal work. If you try to do justice alone, you will get very tired very fast. It's not work that's meant to be done alone. It's work that's meant to be done as a community. This is what we have always done. We've done it in the ways that we have shown up physically to work with our partners, the ways we have physically shown up for those inside this room. It's also something we have done financially as we have shown up for our partners and for those inside of this room. Because we believe that justice is the call of the church, that we are called to be those who love mercy. May that continue to be the kind of church that we are as we move into the future. In the season where it feels really hard, really scary, and potentially a little overwhelming, may we be the kind of people who hold fast to this kind of justice work. The kind of people who won't just critique what's happening out there, but what's happening in here. The kind of people who won't add to the chaos, but people who will bring hope into a world that desperately, desperately needs it. We're going to prepare to take the Eucharist together. If you have children who are down in DCC Kids and would like to grab them to participate in Eucharist with us, now would be a great time to do that. Each week, we have the opportunity to come to the table together. to be reminded of chesed incarnate. That is Jesus. Jesus was the covenantal faithfulness of God brought amongst us, to live with us, to show us what it was like to love justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God, to model for us what it looks like to participate in this kind of mercy and justice work. Here at DCC, we participate in what we call open table communion. That means that every person in this room is invited to take a seat at this table. If you're in here and you feel any kind of nudge to participate in communion, please do. This is safe space for you to do that. This is not our table. This is God's table. In Matthew, he records this at the Last Supper. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins." Take your time, but when you are ready, I invite you to participate in this meal with us together, and as an act of hope and resistance. The bread is gluten-free. In the short cup, you will find juice. In the tall one, you will find wine, and I invite you to participate as you are ready.